Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the Soham murders, which was of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. I'd just like to give you my normal disclaimer. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've simply gathered the information off the internet and compiled it into one video for educational purposes. Jessica Amy Chapman was born on the 1st of September in 1991, and she was described as very much a tomboy who loved playing football. And her parents were called Leslie and Sharon Chapman. Holly Marie Wells was born on the 4th of October in 1991. She was a bubbly, outgoing girl who loved to sing and dance. And her parents are called Nicole and Kevin Wells. The two 10-year-old girls were the best of friends. They were totally inseparable. And they both lived in Soham, Cambridgeshire in England. On Sunday the 4th of August in 2002, Holly's family were having a barbecue. They had a few people over, and Jessica, being Holly's best friend, was also invited round. So the girls would enjoy themselves. They played video games with a friend, they would listen to music, and they were basically just really enjoying their normal Sunday. Both of the girls changed into a Man United shirt each, and Holly's mother actually snapped a picture of the two. Now this picture would actually become infamous in this case, and you will find out why a little later on. After eating with everyone at around about 6:10 p.m, the girls decided that they would return to Holly's room and they would continue to play. It was around about 5 minutes later they decided that they were going to leave the house, but they weren't actually going to tell anybody where they had gone. They didn't tell anyone that they were going, or even that they'd left at all. So the girls went out and they went and actually bought some sweets from a vending machine. And this was in a very well-known area to them. They'd been there so many times before. And once they got the sweets, they decided to head back home. And whilst they was on their way back home, they would pass the home of Ian Huntley, who was a senior caretaker at a local secondary school, who actually lived with his girlfriend, who was called Maxine Carr. Maxine worked as a teaching assistant at St Andrew's Primary School, and that was the school that both of these girls actually attended. It got to around 8 p.m. Nicola went upstairs to go and ask the girls basically if they wanted to see the guests out, wanted to say their goodbyes, because a lot of the people were leaving to go home themselves. When she opened the bedroom door, she found that nobody was there, and both of the girls had gone missing. She panicked like anyone would. She thought they were up there for the past hour and a half, 2 hours. She thought they were playing in the room. She goes up there and they're not. So she runs downstairs and she goes and tells her husband, Kevin. And Kevin searches the house, can't find them, so he then goes out on the streets trying to look for them both. Around about half an hour later, probably not even that, Nicola decides to ring Jessica's parents, Sharon and Leslie, to find out if they've ended up there, if they've gone back to their house. And she found out that they hadn't, and that they were also getting worried as to why Jessica wasn't home yet. Basically, Jessica had a curfew of around about 8:30, I believe. So obviously, as it's passing this time, she begins to worry as to why her daughter hasn't come home. She usually stuck to a curfew, so it was quite unusual for her to not be home by now. Both of the families went out to search for the girls desperately. They were frantically searching everywhere, but it was to no avail. And they then reported them missing at 9:55 p.m. Police immediately launched a huge investigation to try and look for these girls. They had over 400 officers working full time, solely trying to find these two girls. They would go house to house, conducting inquiries all across Soham. And they also had hundreds of volunteers, and that allowed them to get a lot of help to search the surrounding terrain. So basically everyone pulled together to try and find these missing girls. They even had, later on in the investigation, the United States Air Force personnel stationed at nearby bases. So again, the efforts to find these girls was huge. It was massive, with all of the community and everyone just looking for them. The families and the police would go on to do public appeals. And like I said, do you remember the photo that was taken of the girls that Nicola took just 2 hours before they went missing? Well, the Cambridge police would use this in their appeals, and that's how it became so infamous. The police described their appearance and what they were wearing in the hopes that someone had seen them. Somebody out there knew something and could lead to some information coming in. And the parents were pretty adamant that they had kind of instilled in the children not to speak to strangers, and that the girls wouldn't have. And basically not to trust anyone. And the school backed this up as well. They also instilled in the children and the students from a young age about stranger danger. And I personally really can't emphasize this enough. Please, please, guys, you really need to be aware of strangers out there. Please don't trust them. You don't know who they are. You don't know what their intentions are. And there's so many cases and so many people who have trusted people that they thought were okay, and they do bad things to them, and it's just horrendous. You just really, really need to be careful. The police kind of suspected pretty much straight away that they'd been kidnapped, and they went on to question every sex offender in Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire. After 4 days, on the 8th of August 2002, the police released CCTV footage to the public. This footage was recorded just minutes before their disappearance. It was the one that was taken from when they went to the sports centre to get the sweets from the vending machine, and this was around 6:28 p.m. Over the next few days, they released a reconstruction of kind of the last known whereabouts, the last known what they did. The family members made public appeals, they did interviews on ITV. They were just so desperate to locate their children, and who wouldn't? Of course you would be. You'd do anything to get them back. This would lead to 2,000 phone calls and tips from the public, as well as many potential leads, and unfortunately these leads didn't actually end up having any relevance to the case. Quite a few people did actually report having seen the girls in the early days of the investigation. One man even stated that he remarked on their football shirt to his wife, saying, "There's two little Beckhams over there." And a young woman reportedly saw them a little later on, arm in arm, walking down the street. One man, who reportedly had spoken to the girls shortly before they went missing, was 28-year-old Ian Huntley. And he had actually informed the police of this on the 5th of August. He basically said that he had a very quick conversation with them whilst he stood on his doorstep, and they later walked off in the direction of the bridge. Police were quite suspicious of Ian, and you would be. So he's stating that he was the last person to actually speak to them, so maybe he was the last person to see them before they went missing. So that day they sent a lone police officer to do a search of Ian's home, but they didn't really find anything. They did note, however, that the house had undergone extensive cleaning, which Ian stated that was because he'd had a flood, and the police officer noticed that there were clothes hung out on the washing line, even though it had been raining, which obviously is very, very strange. Sometimes, if it's been sunny and your clothes have been hanging up and you forgot about them, and then it's been raining, you know, it does happen, but the police officer did find it strange. And the officer was very suspicious of his agitated demeanour, and Ian would remain a strong suspect. The next day, on the 6th of August, Ian went to pick up his girlfriend, and a neighbour of Maxine's mother actually records seeing the couple stood at his boot, and according to her, Ian was pale. He was shaking like a leaf as he basically looked into his boot. Maxine apparently had her head lowered down and was crying. When Ian realised he was being watched, he slammed the boot shut. Thereon, after, in the weeks that followed, Ian would partake in interviews, and there were several of these. It's reported that he was quite reluctant, but like I said, he was the last person that the girls had spoken to. People wanted to know all the information that he had.
Well, I don't know the girls. I stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just said, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off they walked in the direction of the library over there.
So he basically went on to say that he was shocked that this had happened in his community, and he really didn't like the fact that he was the last person to see them alive. He claimed he was holding out a glimmer of hope that they were found safe. And he went on and took part in and volunteered in the searches for the girls. And he would often ask the police how the investigation was progressing. So, in the eyes of the public, he was seemingly worried for the girls. He helped to try and look for them, to try and locate them. But the officers kind of thought it was strange in a sense, where he was asking them things like how long DNA evidence can survive before deteriorating. Why would someone innocent ask that kind of question? I know people can be interested in things like that, but he was already under suspicion. And then he goes around asking questions about DNA like that. It just puts him more under suspicion. And it was noticed that Ian did actually have 2 scratches on his left jaw, which he stated that his dog made, or was actually made by those poor innocent girls, and that was why he was asking such a question. Now his girlfriend was just as bad. She was interviewed by the press and she backed up his story.
This is something I'll probably keep for the rest of my life, I think. It's what Holly gave me on the last day of term. She was very, very upset because I didn't get my job. And that's the kind of girl she was. She was just lovely, really lovely.
That's really very sweet, isn't it?
Yeah.
She basically said that she'd been in the bath and she'd wished that she'd asked them where they were going and that the pair could have stopped them if they would have known. She also went on to interviews and things like that, and she asked for the person that had them to please let them go. Over a week after the girls went missing, Ian's mental health began to strain. He started losing weight. He was basically displaying symptoms of insomnia. And his erratic behaviour did lead to him being prescribed antidepressants on the 13th of August. On the 16th of August, Ian and Maxine were brought in for questioning, and they were questioned for quite a while. I believe it was around 7 hours.
In the last few minutes, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman, both from the Soham area, have been spoken to by police officers and have agreed to give witness statements to us.
By this point, the police had actually received information that totally contradicted both of their stories. And they also had information that Ian had actually been accused of rape several years prior. This obviously made police very, very suspicious. They wanted to search his home and his car more thoroughly. The police did find items of major importance, and that's why they did actually bring the 2 in. But at the time, it was an ongoing investigation. They didn't divulge what this major breakthrough was initially, because in a sense, they didn't really want to reveal their hand. And I totally understand that. Obviously, it was an ongoing investigation. They didn't want anything to happen that may ruin it. The police arrested Ian and Maxine on the 17th of August in 2002.
In the last few hours, a 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman have been arrested.
Whilst in questioning, Ian really tried his best to appear that he was suffering from mental health issues. He would appear confused, evasive. He would even drool and become unresponsive. So basically they had no choice but to refer him for a psychological evaluation. So despite working in a school, Ian was well known to have engaged in relationships with underage girls. A previous partner, Katie Byron, was just 15 when she met Ian Huntley. He was several years older than her, but they quickly developed a sexual relationship, which would later become abusive. Katie recalled in a documentary that was done about a case. Once it was clear I liked him and we had sex, he began to treat me like a child, to bully me. So there were a lot of failures in the system that basically would allow Ian to actually work in a school, even after he was known to have a relationship with underage girls. Ian had basically been accused of indecently assaulting a 12-year-old girl and was suspected in 3 other attacks, but was still able to get a job as a caretaker in a community college, even though there was a police vetting system in place. They have tried to put in lots of different things to try and stop things like this happening, and the system that was used initially has since been replaced. Police, of course, did reveal the evidence that they found on the 16th of August later on in the case, and it turned out to be the girls' clothing from inside a bin on the school grounds which Ian worked in, along with the burnt and cut up Manchester United t-shirts, which they are so infamous for. Ian's fingerprints were actually on this bin. In his car, they found traces of brick dust, chalk and concrete on kind of the wheel arches and the pedals, even though the car had been thoroughly cleaned. And this would later relate to where the bodies were discovered. A cover from the rear seat was missing, and the carpet from the boot had been completely removed and replaced with kind of a household carpet, and this didn't even fit properly. It was very ill-fitting, and it just looked very strange. On the other side, Maxine was kind of telling police everything, or at least it seemed that way. She told them that she'd lied about her whereabouts, that Ian had told her that the children did go in the house. It was kind of all coming out. Apparently, she said that Ian told her one of the girls had a nosebleed, and he invited them in so that he could try and stop it. And then the girls left. Now, he apparently asked Maxine to lie because of his history with children, and she says that he basically was worried of rape accusations, and so she lied for him. The girls' bodies were discovered on the 17th of August in 2002, when Keith Pryor, a 48-year-old gamekeeper, came across the bodies whilst out on a walk. They were laid side by side in an irrigation ditch, just 5 foot deep, and it was close to a fence of RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk. This was just over 10 miles east of Soham. He said that he'd been walking through the area previously and he noticed a horrible smell. After going back a few days later with some friends, the smell was still there, so he decided that he was going to see if he could find what the source was. And that's when he found the girls. He apparently told his wife to stay back. He didn't want her to see the kind of, I believe they were kind of skeletal remains at this point, partially at least. The bodies had been burned, and from this point they'd been missing for 13 days. So they were in a very, very advanced state of decomposition. And that would result in them not being able to confirm their actual cause of death. Or even if they had been sexually assaulted, they didn't really find anything along the lines of that because the bodies were just so bad. But they did find that none of the bodies showed evidence of knife wounds. They didn't show evidence of kind of pressure on the neck, as if somebody was strangling them with the hands. They didn't find any evidence of drugging or anything like that. So it kind of led them to believe that the cause of death was probably asphyxiation. And after they found the body, Maxine apparently burst into tears. She shouted, "No, it can't have been. It can't have been. He hasn't done it." She apparently believed that Ian was innocent, even after they presented the abundance of evidence that they had collated against him. On the 21st of August, it was confirmed that both of the bodies were that of Holly and Jessica. And this was done through DNA. 9 days later, a public memorial was held at Ely Cathedral to remember and celebrate the life of both girls. The service was attended by approximately 2,000 people, including the girls' classmates, teachers, and 6 family liaison officers who had provided 24-hour service for both families. This case is just so sad. These poor innocent girls just had their life stolen from them. Now, Ian altered his story many times. So basically we don't really know what's the real truth and what's fabricated. Ian basically lured these children into his home. He eventually did manage to convince them to come in by saying that Maxine, who again the girls knew, going to their school, being a teaching assistant, so he used her name, who wasn't actually there, to lure these poor innocent children into his home. When she was in fact visiting her mother in Lincolnshire, she wasn't even in the area. They were so young and they believed this man. Again, they knew Maxine. She worked at the school. So they went into his home. Once inside, he murdered Holly before killing Jessica, as she basically tried to ring her mum for help, which is absolutely heartbreaking. Like I said, he changed his story. In 2003, he said he smothered Jessica by mistake to try and stop her from crying after Holly had accidentally died. This soon changed, however. The Daily Mail reported that Ian said, "If she hadn't kept shouting, she'd have got out of the house alive. I was telling her to stop shouting so I could think. She kept saying, 'You pushed her,' and it was only then, when I put my hand on her shoulder as she went for the door, that I realised I couldn't let her leave." During his trial, Ian insisted that Holly had had a nosebleed. He claimed he'd been trying to attend to it. He let her, she came in his house, went up to the bathroom, he was trying to stop the bleeding, and accidentally knocked her into his bath, where she apparently drowned. So he basically admitted to them dying in his house, but he said that he didn't kill them. He said that Jessica was screaming, and he basically tried to cover her face up for her to shut up. and lost attention on Holly, who was drowning in the bath, because he was so focused on trying to keep Jessica quiet that both girls ended up dying. And why did he clean up all the evidence and really thoroughly clean his house? Because he panicked, he didn't know what to do, so he got rid of the bodies, and especially with his history. The jury basically saw through Ian's lies, and they took less than 18 hours to return with a guilty verdict. Only one person on the 12-strong jury believed that the caretaker was innocent. It had been claimed during the trial by prosecutors that the motives for the murders may have actually been a sexual one, something which obviously links to his past. And it was kind of also supported in a way by the fact that Ian had washed his bed sheets after the murder. On the 17th of December 2003, Ian Huntley was sentenced to 2 life sentences, which means he will serve a minimum of 40 years in prison. This murderer is currently serving time in high security HMP Frankland in Durham, alongside other notorious criminals such as the Yorkshire Ripper. Maxine Carr was sentenced to 3.5 years in jail for her part within the case, perverting the course of justice. We don't actually know Ian's motives behind these murders of the children on that fateful day. And with it now being 18 years ago, I doubt we ever will. This case really does break my heart, and personally I do actually remember it when it was all over the news. This man killed them in cold blood, and he pretended to be worried. He pretended that he didn't know where they were. He went out and searched for them when all along he knew what he'd done. He knew that he'd murdered them and that the bodies were rotting in a ditch somewhere. Just horrendous. These girls would have been around about 29-year-old now. They would have probably had their own families. What gave Ian the right to snatch that chance away from them? The only consolation that the family get, I guess, is that they did catch him and he is serving his time in jail, but obviously that can't bring your family members back. Nothing can. Now, a lot did actually come from this case. As sad as it is, it did really improve our systems and things like that. So there was things like the Bitchard report, and this was put in after the girls were murdered. This kind of outlined that anybody working with children needed to be thoroughly vetted before being able to have such a job. And it kind of introduced things like a national police intelligence system for England and Wales, a registration scheme for anyone wishing to work with children or vulnerable people, training for head teachers and people employing other people on how to interview, ensuring that people are employed according to the safeguarding rules. The main thing that came for this report is a CRB check, and this makes it possible for an employer to check anyone for any previous crimes that they are known about. So, like I said, obviously it's never going to bring these girls back, it never could, but this case kind of was pivotal in a sense, and it did improve things, the system, for the better, but unfortunately it was just too late for Holly and Jessica. Ian should have never ever been allowed to work in a school. He had previous accusations against him, young children, so it just shouldn't have ever happened, but hopefully these systems and things have improved since then, and hopefully it's less likely to happen now. If you guys have any cases that you'd like me to look into, please do let me know and I'll look into them for you. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.